It's interesting how quickly one thing jumps out from these drafts. It's this sort of constant battle between wanting things immediately right now and, well, the quality of what we actually get.
Exactly. Let's dig into that a bit. The source material really zeroes in on how this need for speed for instant results can actually hurt how well things are made. There's that example I think we can all relate of, like a new AI app feature where the user interface is just awkward or confusing. The point being made is that maybe in the rush to get it out the door, the details of good design kind of fall by the wayside.
And maybe we're even getting used to it. Like, we're so bombarded, our attention is so split that we just sort of accept these less than great experiences.
So the first insight here could be that speed and quality aren't always friends. We might need to think more about what we're actually okay with accepting.
Right, and that ties straight into this idea of the efficiency paradox. It's this concept that always aiming for more automation, more convenience can, strangely enough, lead to new kinds of inefficiency later on.
Huh. So it backfires sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Is this constant chasing of the new, the fast, maybe lowering what we expect from things? Are we so focused on just getting it done quick that we miss out on experiences that are actually, better designed, more satisfying in the long run?
It definitely makes you think. And it's not just apps, right? It could be customer service or how we even structure our own work. Now, these Dynaxiom drafts also pivot a bit, looking at language. Specifically, the subtle, kind of sneaky power language has even down to something like using a rhyme.
Well, what's fascinating there is how these small choices can have bigger effects on meaning than you'd think. The source points out that even if you use a rhyme just because it sounds good musically, it still adds this layer of, well, ambiguity.
It's like the sound takes over from the precise meaning sometimes.
Kind of. The need for that rhythm or sound might overshadow clear communication.
Right, which brings up that Bob Seger example. Wish I didn't know now what I didn't know then. Grammatically, it's a bit unusual.
Definitely twists things around.
But it clearly resonated with people, got a feeling across, even if the grammar wasn't strictly, correct. So here's a thought. How often do we do that? Prioritize flow or sound over being perfectly clear. And what's the trade-off there? Are we sometimes losing understanding just because something sounds catchy?
And building on that, this idea of nuance in language, the drafts also get into the difference between perceiving something as inappropriate versus fundamentally wrong.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that. So the idea is that inappropriate really depends on the situation, right?
Yeah.
Context is everything.
Exactly. What's out of line here might be totally fine over there. But wrong, the suggestion is, taps into something deeper. Maybe a violation of more universal human values, perhaps.
And this is where metanorms come in.
That's the concept, yeah. From researcher Robert Axelrod, these are like the underlying rules that shape what a society accepts as normal or right or wrong. Think of them as the rules governing the rules we see day to day.
Okay. Nice.
And the drafts mention how dictatorships often try to mess with these metanorms. They try to change the very foundation of what's considered okay. But history kind of suggests those big top-down changes don't always stick long term.
Interesting. So while the surface rules, the norms, can shift, there might be these deeper principles that are much harder to change. That's a key takeaway, maybe.
I think so. It makes you ask, well, what about our society? How much do we even notice these deep metanorms that guide us?
And how easily could they be shifted, maybe subtly, over time? That's a slightly unsettling thought.
Yeah. Which sort of leads into another observation, a very human one. All of life is about relating to something you're interested in. That really hits at our basic need for connection, for engagement.
Totally. It's about finding that thing, whatever it is, that grabs you, that you want to connect with. And the drafts contrast how we used to do that. Remember those hours-long phone calls where you could really talk?
Oh, yeah. Definitely remember those.
With how things often are now. Quick texts, emojis, maybe a picture. Sometimes conversations feel almost like non sequiturs jumping around. It's a massive shift in how we relate. If you notice that, how much gets left unsaid.
Absolutely. And if you connect that back to what we were saying about attention spans and maybe the quality of experiences, well, it raises some big questions. What does this shift towards shorter, maybe more superficial exchanges do to our relationships long term? Are we losing the knack for sustained, deep conversation? And if we are, what does that mean for understanding each other?
That idea of scattered attention, fragmented focus. It feels like a perfect segue to the next point. Politics as a distraction. The source suggests, look, engaging with politics can be good, a good distraction even, If it leads somewhere useful, maybe informing you, getting you involved.
Right, but there's a flip side.
Exactly. The risk is it just becomes a way to avoid dealing with other stuff, maybe more personal things or harder problems.
And the drafts talk about the sort of cybernetic nature of distractions, how our attention is constantly being steered by inputs, pulled this way and that. So the real challenge becomes, how do you stay focused on what you decide is important? How do you avoid getting pulled off course by all the noise?
And how do you tell the difference between a helpful distraction, something that genuinely informs or energizes you, and one that just, spins your wheels?
It's a tough balance, isn't it? A constant negotiation.
Definitely. Now, the drafts also take a look at the American dream, maybe, offering a kind of sobering thought that perhaps people have forgotten what they really wanted.
Yeah, the way it's framed is interesting. It suggests this progression. First, there was a desire for something better, maybe moving beyond factory jobs, and in many ways that happened. But then the new situation brought its own frustrations, and now you see this sort of nostalgia almost for the return of those very factory jobs, maybe based on a slightly rosy memory.
Right. It really shows how desires shift, and maybe how we're not always great at figuring out what will actually make us satisfied. If you don't really grasp why you're dissatisfied, you could end up chasing things that won't actually fix it. It makes you ask yourself, doesn't it? Are my own goals, the things I'm chasing, really aligned with what I deeply value? Or am I running on old programming, or what others expect?
That feeling of maybe being on the wrong track, or a track you didn't consciously choose, it connects to another point about art and maybe the illusion of free will.
Ooh, okay. This sounds intriguing.
The observation is about how making art can sometimes feel, well, almost absurd, like you're trying to guess what most people will like, what they'll agree on, sometimes just working without really thinking deeply about the choice.
Like following a formula.
Or just following the trend. This thing is popular, let's make more of that. And the source connects this to maybe not exercising free will. It uses the image of being on a hamster wheel.
Okay, I get that. Just running in place, doing the expected thing.
Whereas real free will, the suggestion goes, might involve stepping off that wheel, making choices that are less certain, less safe, maybe.
So the challenge there is to think, how often am I just following the path of least resistance, the popular route, versus making a conscious choice that feels genuinely mine, even if it's a bit scary or uncertain? Am I really choosing or just reacting?
And that ties into perception, too. The drafts mention how subjective our views are and how we tend to impose our opinions where they don't necessarily fit.
Ah, yeah. The example of complaining a slow song is too slow. That really nails it.
Exactly. It's like our expectations are clashing with what the thing is. And then there's the urge to, judge things that don't need judging. Like having an opinion on the height of a mountain. It just is that high.
Right. My opinion doesn't change the mountain.
It just highlights how much our personal filters shape everything. And the source notes something important. What feels normal to us always feels normal, even if objectively it might be quite unusual. It's a nudge to question our own assumptions, maybe.
Definitely. Which leads us, I think, to a really crucial point in today's world. The importance of spotting when things are off. Identifying the bad wiring, so to speak, that disrupts the normal flow. And this brings us to conspiracy theories.
Yeah, complex territory. What I found really insightful here was the idea of lines of demarcation, these invisible lines we all draw, separating what we think is plausible from what we think is just out there. Fall.
We all have them, but they're in very different places for different people.
Exactly. And the drafts talk about how powerful fear can be in pushing those lines, how it can actually change brain chemistry. Stress releasing cortisol, finding connection in shared suspicion, releasing oxytocin, maybe even a hit of serotonin from feeling like you've uncovered something hidden. It's a strong cocktail.
Wow. So biology plays a role too.
It seems likely. And you see how some theories just stick around forever, like the JFK ones mentioned. There's this almost knee-jerk tendency now to suspect things might be fake. Plus, the sunk cost fallacy, it's hard to admit you were wrong after you've invested so much belief, so much emotion into something.
Right, digging your heels in. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Dynaxiom drafts, a few big threads seem to weave through it all. There's that tension, speed versus quality. There's the subtle power of language, how we perceive things. There are the forces shaping our norms and desires. And then these complexities around belief, doubt, and, conspiracy.
Yeah, quite a mix. And maybe the final thought to leave you with, the listener, is about those lines of demarcation. Where are yours, really? When you think about it, what makes you accept one idea but reject another? How much might your own fears or maybe your desire for certainty or connection be influencing where you draw those lines? And maybe in this world overflowing with information and distractions, how consciously are you choosing what to believe, what to focus on, and what path you're actually on? Are you choosing or just reacting to the currents?